Suzan Condon, or Suzan Condon, and I include that Cortamanche for reasons. I was born in the town of Hartford, Vermont, and lived on a farm there with my family, and then went through all kinds of changes in my life and ended up here when I was, I don't know, maybe 30. And I was going to, the reason I came here was because I could afford an apartment at the Hollister Hill Apartments, and I got a job working at Twinfield as a substitute teacher, and I continued that pretty much full-time for 7 years while my son went through the first 7 grades. And when I lived at Hollister Hill, I was doing a lot of photography, and so I had heard about this older native that lived up Ennis Hill Road, and so I found him, Albert May, and he made butternut. He made all kinds of different kinds of wooden frames and picture frames with the glass, and I really especially liked the butternut frames, and so I would buy frames from Jack. So I would go up and visit Jack and Vivian, who lived up at the house next to me, even if it was 200 degrees in the kitchen when you went there, because they had a cook stove, and that's all they had for cooking. So that's how I originally got here.
And so you had family in the area, in Vermont anyway, and you wanted to say something about your mother?
Yes, I wanted to start with where I came from as a Vermonter, because I've always called myself a native Vermonter. And I know what that means because I was brought up with people who also call themselves native Vermonters, except for my mother. My mother was born in Canada and was smuggled into the United States and got found out when she was about 12 or 15 in that area, and was deported and had to come back into the United States as a legal alien, and had her green card for all the years and she worked, and she had 8 children of her own, and when it came time for her to get her Social Security, by golly, she decided she was going to get her citizenship, and she did.
She got deported when she was 12. So who was traveling with her? Did she leave by herself?
She came under the feet of her siblings, 10 siblings, in a station wagon from Canada. They had been living up there for a little while. My grandmother, who also was fluent French, her family was also from Canada. So they had been living up there. Grammy was pregnant and had my mother, and then they eventually came back, and mother was only maybe 3 when they came here. But my grandfather liked to drink alcohol, and he sort of told on her.
Oh boy.
And so they came and got her. And it was really traumatic for her, and her whole life was traumatized. She wouldn't teach us French. We picked up what we picked up from she had, I don't know, 6 or 8 sisters and that many brothers. And so when they got together, they spoke exclusively French. So we got a lot of it. And even after my mother had her stroke, I could understand what she meant just by her intonation. Get the dust off the TV.
She was one of 10?
She was one of 12 who survived, 14 in all.
A lot of relatives, and how many?
Oh yes.
How many siblings?
And my father's family my father is the oldest boy in 11 children, so.
Your mother was one of 12, and your dad?
Was the oldest of 11. He
And
was the
how-
oldest. She was the youngest girl to survive. She did have two other siblings that were girls around her age, one older, one younger, and they both died. My grandmother had terrible TB, so all those kids got farmed out at one point. My mother went to the orphanage in Burlington, the Catholic orphanage, and some of my uncles, two of my mother's younger brothers, went to a school in Montpelier, but I don't really know that much about it. It was a school for boys or something. It was Catholic.
And how many siblings have you got?
7.
You are quite the family.
Yes.
Yes,
and
you do.
and we were not the largest. On my mother's side, there was her oldest sister had 10 children, and we only had 8.
So you raised your family here, pretty much.
Yeah.
And
I
you have one son?
I have just one son. He was a twin. His twin died at birth, and so I have one very wonderful young man who's now a locksmith and lives in Delaware.
What was it like to raise a child in Marshfield, both as a parent and from the lens of your son?
Well, I grieved a great deal for his twin for many, many years. Many, many years. I think until Nate was in his 30s. It was a great loss to me. I had them at home. I was an old homesteader, you know. I really was a homesteader from birth and didn't realize it, but I taught a lot of other homesteaders how to garden and farm and those kind of things that they were all coming to Vermont for back when I was just out of high school. But the whole reason I wanted the house that I ended up with was to teach Nate building skills. My 5 brothers were all builders. My father was in the building trades, but he wasn't a carpenter. He was a house painter and liked steeples on high places that I could never get to. I just couldn't do it. He did finally tell me that my younger sister could climb, and she'd go way up that ladder. You got one girl that could climb. But I wanted to raise Nate in an area that was really rural, and it was kind of like a miracle what happened that I ended up getting that house. There was an attorney that lived in it, and Clarence Ennis was renting the house to him, and he wasn't paying rent. After the first month's rent of $100, he didn't pay. So I had talked to Clarence before that because I found out who owned it, because it's right at the bottom of Jack May's Hill. So I was going by and wondering, what's the story with that place? And so I found out it was Clarence, and I went to him and asked him, what's the story with that place? And he said, do you want to rent it? And I said, oh, I don't know if I'm really ready. Nate was 8, and I just wasn't sure I was financially could do it. But it would have been the same rent, $100 a month. You pay the electric. So he said, how much money you got in the bank? And I told him how much it wasn't anything. And he said, well, that'll be your down payment, and I'll hold the mortgage and charge you the same thing. But you gotta deal with this lawyer, because I'm done dealing with him. He had to take him to court to get his money. He got his money back, and he wanted nothing to do with renting it anymore. So I said, okay. Scared to death. Not of anything there, because it was extremely rural at that time. There was either a fisher cat or some kind of cat that was living right behind me and had quite the track of screaming in the night and those kind of sounds. And we had to move. Once I said yes, I would buy it, and I gave him my little dinky savings and was ready to move in. I still had to deal with the tenant, and that was October of '87. And by January, he froze the water, and I had to get in an emergency. And then I went to court immediately and asked to have him removed, and they did. I did end up going in front of Judge Mahady in the Supreme Court in order to get him taken out of there. And then it was January by then, and it was 30 below, and there was no heat, and the pipes were all burst, so I had to stay where I was until April. And in April, when there was still snow on the ground, we moved into a tent in the front yard.
Now, you were a single mom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow, so
I was
you're
a
dealing
single
with
mom
all
the
this
whole
on
time.
your own.
Yes, determined.
Wow. So, was there a bus route?
A bus route. The best bus route ever was then. There no longer is a bus route that comes to that. It stopped in front of my driveway, and it picked up Albert and Hazel Albert and Hazel, they're all Alberts. So, and they went to school from there with my son on the bus. And Lee Stone was the bus driver. Best bus driver ever.
What made him the best?
Calm, absolutely sort of serene, would sort of put his hands in his lap when he stopped the bus and the kids got on. Was nothing like him. He just was so safe. He knew how to drive the bus on that corner, which is a tricky thing. He drove up and backed up the maze road and then headed back down the hill. And no kids got run over or anything right there in my yard. It was absolutely wonderful.
So
he went through K through 12.
Yeah, so it sounds like as a parent, Marshfield suited you.
I did want to say a little bit about
how was it
from the time that Nate went to school, and I hadn't been to kindergarten. He started in first grade, and he had a little bit of trouble with reading, and it's funny because he's such an avid reader. One of the teachers kind of took him under her wing, and she said he was ready in a month, but I didn't want to let him go, so she kept him for a while, and he was just he's just like I said, he's an incredibly avid reader now.
So that was a good experience.
That was a great experience for him, and the whole experience of going to school was wonderful. I found community that I was looking for, that I didn't even know I was looking for. When he went to school, it was like this family. I was also a substitute teacher there, so sometimes I was Mrs. Condon, but mostly I was Mrs. Condon, if they didn't want to get in trouble. It was quite the scene. I also substituted for Cabot at the same time, and I really did have a kid really getting crazy about it, and he just kept going on, Mrs. Condon, is it true you preferred the Trojans? Because they knew I worked at Twinfield, so it was just this whole thing, and at first it was really hilarious.
The Trojans were a sports team.
Yeah, the Trojans are the mascot for all the teams, sports teams at Twinfield. So, and I really couldn't help but laugh, but it got a little annoying. I did find out later that a kid from Marshfield, whose mother was a secretary, got kicked out of school when I was substituting for a high school boys gym class, and was looking up at him. He called me Mrs. Condom, and I just didn't like it at that point and sent him to the office, not knowing until just a couple of years ago that he got kicked out for that. And I never knew it. So that was really pretty funny.
You found a community here, and I was going to ask you, how you would describe the people here, and how it might be different from where you grew up, which was Hartford.
Yeah, very different. First of all, I graduated from the first highest number of kids from Hartford High School was 100 kids. So that was a lot more kids, but we grew up on a farm, so we were always the farm people, and we were always the one that filled the pews in the church when we went. And then as we got older, my folks split the family up, and the older boys were serving mass, and my sister, who had some disabilities, she would go to church with them, and the rest of us would go with my mother.
And so were the people different there? Were the people different in Hartford than you found them here?
The people in Marshfield were more like my grandparents and my father. My father was a real Vermonter. It didn't matter that he was only a third-generation Vermonter. He was a native Vermonter, and he had the accent like the people I gravitated towards. Albert May, for instance, was from here and spoke the language as from here. And all the people in my life that I've really gravitated towards, I have like this split life. It's like I've gravitated towards Buddhism and Buddhist people and that kind of spiritual community, and I've gravitated towards the native as you can be, because I get it.
Well, they're both authentic.
Yeah.
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 So, what did you enjoy or not enjoy about living here? You know you liked that it was rural.
During those years when my son was growing up and going to school, there wasn't much of anything that I didn't like that I remember. I didn't like living in poverty. I didn't like working 7 days a week, but I made it work. I worked at the schools, and then I also took in respite care. I provided respite care for disabled people on the weekends to stay over. And
so you're an energetic person, let us say.
Well, yeah.
Sounds like you've been working overtime from day one.
Yeah. Well, work was, you were prided on working as when I was growing up. That was what life was about. Everybody has to work. And I didn't like a lot of it. I hated gardening when I was a kid because they had the long rows. You know, nothing goes in a long row at my house. It goes in a French intensive bed and that's it. You know, I don't plant lettuce like that. I plant lettuce like that. Because those long rows were just brutal when you had to pick 4 rows of beans and whatever there was. And I was a girl, so I was in the house. My older sister had some issues in high school, and it was me in the midst of 5 brothers and a baby sister.
Canning the beans.
You name it.
Yeah.
Anything and everything, because we did it all. We didn't know we were organic farmers, but we were, because my father didn't like chemicals.
Prepared you for all the work you were going to do later.
And I just admired everything about him. He was a wonderful person. He was very kind, very giving. This makes me want to talk about his parents. My father's father had 11 children with my grandmother, and they were the most industrious people I have known. I've known other industrious people, but not a lot of them. They had cabins on their farm that they rented out. They lived in Heartland, North Heartland, where the Heartland Dam was being built. So they had a boarding house where Grammy fed all those men, and they had those at least five cabins, some double, some single beds. They had, I don't know if she came with the farm, but this older woman, we called her come here, because she always stood out on her porch and went, come here, I'll give you some candy. And we weren't supposed to go there, but I used to take my younger brother, and we would go to Come Here's house, and she would crawl up in a cupboard, and there had to be candy that was older than her, and we didn't care because candy is candy, and we didn't get a lot of it, so it was pretty special. But my grandfather raised pigs, hogs, baby pigs. My grandmother raised 3 giant barns of chickens. They were 3 stories, and they were cement block that they built. And she was never so proud of anything but to say that she bought my grandfather his first long wool coat for church by her egg money. She
So
candled.
this was egg money. It wasn't hens for eating that she sold. It was
No, all laying hens.
Eggs. So
all
she
candled. I have her little thingy that she candled all her eggs on, large, medium, small.
Which means she.
There were stories told at her funeral about how an egg never got by her, and she fell in a puddle. She was only 4 or 11. She fell into a puddle with 2 baskets, you know, those plastic coated wire baskets that are this big. I have both of hers. She fell in a puddle and held those eggs up. It was full of eggs and not an egg broke.
So she wholesaled her eggs. Like, she did not sell them all herself. She gave them to stores to sell?
No,
She sold
Grandpa
them.
had a milk run. My grandfather sold milk. Well, he sold it to whoever bottled it. Maybe he bottled it. He sold the little pint bottles that went well in White River Junction. And he had a route that went all through town and all over the place and sold her eggs and his milk. And I'm sure they sold pork and all that kind of stuff because he raised pigs.
So they were not only industrious, they were enterprising.
Oh, absolutely. Entrepreneurs from day one. And keep an impeccable house.
Wow.
And always a pie. Always a pie. Go pick some berries. And, you know, it was amazing. My mother was like that. My mother grew up in poverty on a farm that was a real poor farm in the Brookfield area. And my father used to tell, she worked at the Hartford Diner, and that's where he met her. She was the pie lady.
So
Maybe that was the connection.
So am I reading into this, or the warmth of that memory and experience for you is something you wanted for Nate and yourself?
Oh, yes, absolutely. For myself, for sure. It always was a serious draw for me. And for him also. And I never lived in a town, ever. I still haven't. Hollister Hills is close to living in an apartment and all that to me. And what did I do but ask my friend to come and plow the field and harrow it and till it so that I could grow food and teach all those people in Hollister Hill how to grow garden. I'll get it all, manure and everything. You just all.
And you did?
And no, they send out the kids. So I did it with the kids, like the Pied Piper. And they all went home with a wagon full of food in the fall.
So
little wagons.
So you were a real participant in community. Tell me the various roles you played in town. Like, you know, you said you mentored. Any volunteering, community suppers, town meeting. What have you? How have
Well,
you,
I'll tell you, my job, once I started working for the Council on Aging, that work changed my focus. I had been more focused on kids, and the truth is, I moved in with someone who had 2 more kids, and so 3 kids all of a sudden was a lot, and they were all early teenagers. So that didn't last a real long time, 3-4 years, but it's always been important to me, to my soul, to have a sense of community. But the thing I want to say about that is when my son graduated from high school and went off to college, that community connection ended. It was really abrupt, and I didn't expect it, and I didn't know it was coming, but it was a huge shift in community. Because those people, they weren't necessarily my friends per se. I was part of the school. I was part of Nate's life. I was part of, you know, kids coming, and he had made a lot of friends at Cabot, from Cabot School, and you know, he was in sports and those kind of things. But when he graduated, it was a big shift for me, huge.
Well, were you still at the school?
I just remembered that when he graduated, and he moved he went to college in New York at Clarkson, and then the second year he came back and went to UVM, and I used to go to Burlington to drive in the city, to not be so distracted, because I'm pretty easily distractible. Not to be distracted by the signs, because every time I went up there, I wanted to read all the signs, and there was like just too many.
So when he graduated, did you stop working at the school, or you weren't part of that community
No,
anymore?
I had switched, in his 7th grade year, I switched to being a case manager, an advocate for elders. It started out being called an advocate.
Okay.
And I worked in the Northeast Kingdom at that point. For 7 years, I was an advocate for them. And I learned all the skills of the trade. And then I decided to take a year off, because it's pretty exhausting when you love, no matter who they are, if they're an elder. And, you know, I took in an awful lot from my upbringing, you know, honor thy father and thy mother. You would never in your life consider disrespecting your grandparents. They were the most to be honored people. And I didn't even know the half of what I was honored with until I became a case manager. And I loved it. I immediately absolutely loved it. But it was the legal case. I had gone to Woodbury College and got my paralegal.
Okay.
When Nate was young and I was substituting and all that, I also went and did that, which was the most self-confidence building for me, was to be able to because I didn't like school. I liked being outside. I wanted to be one of the boys that could go work with my dad, because he was really nice and kind and told you things and treated you well. And it was hot in the kitchen, and it wasn't much fun in the garden or any of those other things. Hanging diapers. None of that stuff was a lot of fun.
So you started in the caring professions and being an advocate, and where did you say it was for
I
the
started
Council on
at
Aging?
the VA as a ward clerk when I was in high school. I worked for St. Johnsbury Trucking as a billing clerk. And then I went to Mary Hitchcock and pediatrics and became a nurse's aide and took care of kids, and that was when Rubber Ducky was a famous song. Rubber ducky, ha ha ha. And I had a little rubber ducky that I took around with me. Entertaining. And then I went to Brandon Training School and worked with really severely and profoundly disabled kids.
What moved you to do that?
I just had a big heart, and I wanted some new experience, I guess.
And you said
I found
you had
out.
a sister who with some disabilities. Did that have anything to do with it?
No, she was intellectually just fine, but she had a period of time when she was having seizures and fainting. And that was very stressful on the whole family. Yeah, when your sister's having a seizure and you think she's just kicking you, because we slept in the same bed. You know, there was a lot of us. So we were doubled up in some rooms, and she was kicking me in the night, and I thought she was kicking me, so I kicked her back. She fell out of bed. And then I said, she's doing something funny. I don't know what it is. I was just a kid.
But you were a Pied Piper by nature and helped the kids in the garden, and so then this leads you to Brandon. And are they all children there at Brandon?
No, they were all ages, K through,
Adults?
birth. I was in the early ward. They were birth to 19 years old. They were severely and profoundly physically involved. But I've always been drawn to the people having trouble, having a hard time. Not my sister so much, but because I think I was around it. You know, I was around that, and so I just was drawn to the people who had a hard time. Like one of my best friends as a kid, her mother left her father, and that was to be shunned, and you don't hang around with that. Her mother's running around, and you're not going to be like that. And I'm not going to abandon my best friend either. So I always was that kind of loyal Sagittarian.
Well, it also sounds like your family had pretty good values.
Oh yes.
That way.
Yeah. And even my folks remained in love their whole life. And that was, even though there were times I didn't, like the division between male and female, it was their love. It was their life. And that, even though my life didn't go the same way with a husband and that kind of stuff, I had those values. I appreciate those values. And
I wonder if you could have been as valuable to the community if you'd been sucked into a marriage.
I tell you, it would have been a little bit easier, I think.
Easier.
Even building my house, there were times when I had friends that came over and gave me a hand on different stuff, but I pretty much, when I bought my house, this is a great story, when I knew I was doing it, I said, Nate, we're going to have to go get a saw. I'm going to have a skill saw. I'm not going to be able to do anything here without a saw, so we're going to go buy Mom a skill saw, a 7-inch electric skill saw called Makita. And the second place we're going to go is to the Humane Society and see if we can't find a puppy who became Makita. The power tool. He was a soft-hearted dog. And so that's what we did. And, my father, when I left home at 17, my father gave me 2 things, a screwdriver and a hammer. Said, you'll probably need these somewhere along the way. Good move. Good move, Dad. I still have them.
And you gutted your house.
Yeah. My house was a real bad mess. It was a camp. They built it as a house, but neither Leland Ennis or Clarence Ennis knew how to build. They weren't builders. They were farmers. So it's built on 3-foot centers on the floor, and they were rotten. And the porch, I went through the porch floor. It wasn't too long. Had to be in there. And the piers were all leaning over, and I have to put in here, Danny Sicily was the electrician for Clarence. And so when there was the dispute was that the attorney had frozen the water, he also froze the pump and the pressure tank. And so that all had to be replaced and fixed and everything. So it was nip and tuck there for a while, as financially trying to make it go there. But, I just was determined. And that was another nice place to have respite, having people over for respite, because I would have, I took care of one guy.
Not to give you
for
respite,
30 years.
but
Oh,
to
no,
take care
to
of.
take care of people for money on the weekends, for someone else to have respite. No, my respite was Nate's friends, gathering up with his friends. I met these group of people that were called the White Hart Band, and I used to listen to them and go and hang out with them who had kids the same age. And he was a social butterfly. My son was, he loved everybody.
He brought the world to you.
Yeah, in a way. And so, my whole wanting to make sure that he had skills was a big part for me. That he went into life with skills that he could take and build his own house and grow his own food. And
Well, you gave him a screwdriver and a hammer, too.
Oh, I gave him many tools, which he still has. I gave him tools every year for birthday and Christmas. There's always a tool involved somehow, and he has them. That to me is so wonderful. He's, and he works with his hands. He's a locksmith. In my wildest dreams, I did a lot of work with jewelry, making earrings and porcupine quill earrings, and working with beads and rocks and gems and minerals and that kind of stuff.
My goodness, you've had 3 lifetimes.
So, oh yeah, I did the craft fairs around here too. He's working with these little tiny lock things now, which never, he said, this is what he told me. Don't try to talk me into, because I wanted him to build different kinds of alternative things for disabled people. I'm going to send you off to engineering school. Don't forget, there might be some magic that you could make for somebody that really needs it, because he's very much engineer-like. And he said, don't you ever ask me to be a social worker. I'll tell you that. I'm never going to be a social worker.
So what did you and he, like in terms of the town's activities, the Stranahan Forest didn't exist probably way back, but, did you, and I don't know how long the library has offered programs, but what did you take advantage of in Marshfield? Boating, hiking, any seasonal activities, any?
See, that was before I started kayaking, and now I'm an avid kayaker, but it wasn't then. We got together with our friends, and we had potlucks all the time. We went to Groton and camped in Groton. That was huge. I spent a lot of time with a lot of kids on the beach at Boulder
State
Beach.
Forest, yeah.
Silver Lake, what is it?
Older.
Stillwater. That was invaluable because I could actually read while they were in the water sometimes as they got older. And then we camped there. Once everybody got bicycles, we'd bring all the bicycles, and had quite the camping setup with a trailer full of stuff that
So that's great. You got a lot of use out of it.
Oh yeah.
Well, so let's go back to your professional life. So we know you started by being an advocate, and then what happened from there?
And then I took that year off. I came to the town hall here, had a business in here called Heaven and Earth, and I took a year off from advocacy and answered the phone for the Gem and Minerals store, Heaven and Earth, and packed up and did all the shipping with another woman, and set up for shows, did some shows with them when they were selling, and then Beth Stearns called me. I was thinking about I needed to do something else because that was $7 an hour, and it was in the 90s.
And say who Beth is.
Beth Stern was the director of Central Vermont Council on Aging, and she asked me. I sent her a caregiver resume saying I could come in and be Susie Cream Cheese and come in and make people happy and cook their meals and do their laundry, whatever. And Beth says, send me your real resume. I need a case manager. So it had changed from pure advocacy to case management.
What's the difference?
Not much. Not much of any. Funding. And case management became a big issue for long-term care Medicaid. In order for the Agency on Aging to be able to accept state funds to pay the agency for our work, case managing people on long-term care Medicaid to stay home instead of in a nursing home. That's when it changed to case management. It became a little bit before that, but...
So you had more coordination and record keeping, or
no? It was no different to us who did the
really?
work. We always did that work, helping people stay at home. We followed the Older Americans Act to meet people where they're at and help them from there. And It's their decisions, not our decision. Nothing was my choice or I gave people information. And I gave them a lot of families information. I served Marshfield, Plainfield, East Montpelier, Woodbury, Calais, and Cabot. That was my 6-town territory.
How many cases did you have?
About 80 a month, at least. Sometimes more, sometimes a little less, but carrying a caseload of 80 to 100.
And this is visiting them each
Visiting them in
month?
their homes, establishing a relationship, and then offering them what they qualify. Once we would do an assessment, it started out as a 14-page assessment with 147 questions. So you knew the person pretty well by the time you got through that. And it all started on paper, back in the days when we did everything on paper. And then that had to be entered into the computer by someone. And then I liked it a lot less when I had to do it into the computer, either at the client's table or next to their bed. And I wanted to engage from here, and I had that thing trying to get the computer to work in Timbuktu without service. So I worked a lot of extra free hours. I'll just say it like that. A lot of extra hours. Because I wasn't a record-keeping person per se, and I would put them off. If I put them off for 2 weeks, I was doomed. Because then I had the next 2 weeks, and the next 2 weeks I was always behind. And it was a nerve-wracking thing because you were supposed to get your records in every month. And so it was really difficult. And do all the work. Fill out a 24-page application for Medicaid or food stamps or whatever, and help that person through that process and get the right answers and get the right amount. It was huge.
And then dealing with Medicaid. If
And
they
I
had
didn't
questions?
leave any stones unturned when it came to what the client might get or need. I went for every possible application I could find. And I found some new ones. Out of Boston, Sarah Devon's fund was this little fund and some lawyers had, and I found out about it, and I got people glasses and hearing aids. And I just recently, maybe a month ago, did an ad for Bernie Sanders.
I was going to ask you about that.
And about Medicare advocacy. Asking for dentures, eyeglasses, and hearing aids to be covered under Medicare. Because that, to me, is one of the more ridiculous, it always was. I mean, I had coined the phrase with clients that Medicare doesn't really care. It's a business, it's an insurance, and it's political, and it's all that. And it's not about us people.
Covering basic.
It's not about whether you can eat. But I would fight for those people.
Or hear.
I brought some of the most colorful people into the State House to testify. My best was when I got the woman who probably weighed 300 pounds. And this was when Medicaid would pay for 1 diaper a day in an adult. 1 diaper a day. And that just bugged me anyways. So she was complaining about it, and I said, how about if I help you to write up something to go in front of the legislature and talk about that? And she did it. And she stood up on her own and said, I'll show you what 1 diaper a day does for me. I'm going to sit in every one of those cloth seats right in this house. And they changed that rule. We changed that rule.
Is that a state rule?
It was.
Okay.
Medicaid rule. So federal and state.
Okay.
You get 1 diaper a day, and they were the worst diapers on earth. They were like wearing, those chucks that you put under someone that's incontinent?
Yeah.
That's what they were like, with some tape that didn't really stick. Most humiliating thing on earth for an elder. And you finally have raised your children and half the village's children and all those kind of things. And then you come to, it used to be 65, and you get your Medicare, and you can't afford dentures. You know, all the old farmers are the people that I love so much. You know, I don't want to say I love them the most, because I had loved many people that lived in villages too. Hot little apartments with no air conditioning. You know, it was just horrendous.
Did your stint at Woodbury doing the schooling help you, or was it all experience that led you to be able to do what you did?
It gave me the self-confidence to know that I had a legal mind, and I still do. And it's always been there. And it really helped me to see that there was value in that, and it wasn't just intuitive, it was practical and helpful. And so, and and I had to go to court against the lawyer that was in my house. I had just graduated from Woodbury, and a friend of mine offered to be my lawyer, and he was going to go in on a narrow issue, just the water. And I said, this is a man that practices in the state of Vermont, and I'm going to tell the story from my perspective and an elder's perspective who got rooked by him and hurt financially by him. And I'm sorry if that crap comes across my plate, I'm not going to eat it. So
Wow. You're a force.
Got him out of there, and
wow.
He did get disbarred. He can't practice in Vermont again. Not because of my situation, but something else that was going on at the same time.
But it complemented it. Wow.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you did that for how long?
The case management?
The case management.
28 years in total between the two agencies, and the longest in central Vermont. After about 7 or 8 years as a case manager here in Marshfield and the surrounding towns, I changed from case management because it was so heavily laden with not only the work for clients, which was my reason to be there, was to get them what they needed, but to, I forgot what I was going to say.
It was so heavily laden with, was it?
With the computer.
Oh, yeah.
But nothing changed that for me, because I'm just not that person to sit there and
Right.
get it.
And yet the caring profession is who you are, so describe what you're doing now.
Well, I've been a caregiver. I just recently helped someone pass on. I worked for her when she broke her shoulder, and they're in East Montpelier, and so I've done some of that caregiving work. I'm trying to be a retired person now.
I want to say good luck.
And I
after
have a
hearing
lot
about
of
you.
people that, you know me, I gotta have those appendages of people that need help. So I have a few of those that are unpaid positions of helping people. And then I visit somebody at the nursing home that used to live in Marshfield, Marty Levin. She's absolutely fantastic. She's in her 90s. And her 3 daughters can't be here to see her. The pandemic was horrendous for all of us.
I wanted to
But
ask
I'm
you how
back
it affected your life. You can talk,
I will talk about
yeah,
that
talk about
after.
that.
But so I'm back to seeing her again, and I saw her for the first time last week without a mask, and she could recognize me and understand me, because people who are deaf, you put the mask on your face and you might as well forget it. And or they'd put us in a room at Woodridge that would echo, or they'd put us outside of an air conditioner. If we had, when we were outside looking in the windows to oh my God, that was horrible. That was the worst.
So what kinds of adaptations did you have to make for COVID besides the mask?
Nothing really worked. I went to see her, and I always, my little thing that I do for the family, because I know that had it been my mother, I would have absolutely adored getting a picture. So I always take a picture of her. And now I'm visiting Jack May, who is in the same nursing home. And that's delightful. I just do that to go visit him and get my accent back, because boy, Jesus, if he's got one, it's the best one. Really got a good one. Marty's totally different. She lived there. She loved Marshfield, and every time I say Marshfield, she's just beaming, because I raised my 3 girls there, and so she does remember a lot of that, and that's what I really enjoy.
So what did
visits.
COVID do with, you must have been not be able to see people in person.
I didn't see anybody. I
So
saw
what-
one friend
Did you
in
were you not
Marshfield, who's
working
somebody
there?
that I help a lot.
Uh,
And I wasn't able to work. I actually had taken a little job with my niece, owns the smoothie shop on the mall. Oh, it's right next to the fitness center. And I was working there, and I was liking it because I was getting a lot of exercise, and I had gone and signed up for a thing at UVM. If you have high blood pressure, they would give you a Fitbit. So I did that thing. Went to UVM, let them take my blood pressure, and got the free Fitbit. So I was really tracking my steps and stuff. But anyways, I digress. I forgot what I was talking about.
well, just COVID, so you,
Oh,
you
COVID.
suddenly had to stop working, and you were working for
Yeah,
your
so I
niece.
said to my niece, have you listened to the news? It's getting really bad, and I'm getting really scared. I'm on the Berlin Mall. And she doesn't like me to wipe down the equipment with any chemicals, anti-disease stuff, because they cost $100 and some odd or whatever. The
equipment.
where you put your credit card and stuff, the debit cards and stuff. Everybody's signing that, and I'm like, oh. So I finally said, honey, I gotta go. I can't be here. I'm 68 years old. I don't really want to be getting it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left and came home and made sure I had enough food. I can, and I freeze, and so I had that stuff, but I was like, oh my God, toilet paper. Everybody's running for toilet paper. It was hilarious. But I knew I was going to be in for the long haul, because I feel vulnerable just as an aging person, and it scared the daylights out of me. The whole thing was absolutely frightening to me.
And were you working at the time and being a case manager, or?
No, I had already
okay.
retired.
You had already
No,
retired.
I retired.
So the adaptation you had to make was more personal, like, I'm gonna keep myself safe, I'm gonna be
Right.
at home, and
Right. I still have to work some. You don't make a lot when you work for a nonprofit. And even though I gave my guts out, and I wasn't paid like a social worker. And another thing that I really have to always put my plug in is for the home health, nurses' aides, and homemakers. Salt of the earth, best people on earth. There were 2 that were in Marshfield, and this area. They served all the elders in this area. 2 middle-aged to getting older women who went into 10 people's houses a day. And this friend of mine that lives in Marshfield, his father, when I met him, his father was a client, and I soon had to give that client to someone else because I was getting involved with the whole family. He was being bathed by a home health aide in his kitchen cast iron sink, that one big cast iron old sink, in a little dishpan, because that's what he had for bathing. That's what they used. And that was a family who always combed their hair before dinner, before any meal. They were all cleaned up, farmers, scruffy earth people. You know, that's what, there was no shower, there was no tub, there was a dishpan. And when I saw those girls would just go in there with a big fat smile on their face and greet all these people, no matter, talk about greeting people where they are, meeting people where they're at. Those women have all my, so I always was advocating for them too, to get paid more. They were making $7, $8 an hour and doing this for 30 some odd years. One of them is still doing, she's working with hospice now, she's still in the area.
It's kind of what my mother did. Yeah. It's hard
Bless.
work too. It's hard physical work.
It's hard physical work, it's hard emotional, you lose them, you get attached after you're going there to bathe them 3 times a week, and then they're gone. And you just roll that over and go on to the next. And
Were you able
the giving that happens, that's not compensated in income, to me is such a letdown for me as I age, because my Social Security isn't enough. So I always have to find some little extra stuff, and I'm getting tired.
And do you have any people in your life who are support for you?
Financial support, no.
But how about
No.
otherwise?
I have friends, and I have, you know, my family is still on Vermont, although I don't see much of them. But we do have gatherings. We haven't seen each other. I haven't seen all my family since the virus.
Are you
And
about
people
to?
are still getting vaccinated, and so I don't know when we're going to all decide that it's safe. Some of the younger siblings got together, and I was invited to go to the camp, and I just didn't go. It was like, no, I don't want to get it, and I don't want to give it if I did get it, and I don't want anything to do with it. The COVID.
The COVID.
I love hearing elders talk about the COVID, that 19 thing. That COVID. Evil.
Did you, well, you weren't working, I was gonna say, you were gonna lose your water there. Did we lose anybody to it that you knew, that were older?
Yes. A niece's mother, who they were so sure that it was a hoax. Her mother was exposed on a Friday at her work, and she was gone by Monday with a blood clot. So for a family that didn't believe that it was even real, and they had all gathered together that weekend, and they all had to be tested, and it was a real concern for everybody. She died at young, 56, and
Did that affect whether they went for vaccination?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
My own son hasn't gone for vaccination because his wife is allergic to everything. And so she's not going to have it. And it's the 40-year-olds that are not getting it as much. And they seem to really believe that it's not going to happen to them. And they're going on a trip to California. It's very worrisome. You know, you can't tell them that, because it's just like an argument, but it's their choice. I'm not sure I believe that, really, to be perfectly honest.
You don't believe it's their choice?
I don't think it's necessarily a choice
You
to
think
not get vaccinated when it's a pandemic.
Oh, you don't believe it should be a choice?
Mm,
You mean, you think, is that what you're saying?
maybe
Or-
that should be.
Yeah.
I have really mixed feelings about whether it should be or not. I don't like the idea of imposing things on people, but on the other hand, if they aren't going to look at the science and look at prevention, and yes, we don't know enough about it to know either way, one or the other, but we know that that you're prevented from getting the virus or getting it worse if you have the vaccination. So I keep just begging for them to talk to their doctors And the doctors in Delaware didn't even, they posed the question, are you getting the shot? But they aren't giving any push or anything. And my son, who was a preemie and has issues with his lungs from that, it's really extremely frightening to me. And he's a locksmith, so he's out there. He's not only out there, he's in people's cars, sitting with their steering wheels. And, you know, he still wears a mask, but it's a really frightening thing.
Absolutely. Oh. So, we're all going to try to get back to life as normal, but yeah, then there's that kind of situation that makes it not life as normal, because it doesn't. You can't let your worry probably won't abate too much. So, we are going to try to wrap up. It's 20 of 3. So I was just going to ask you a couple more questions. Like, how has Marshfield changed since you live here? You want to say anything about that? Oh, and you just thought of something, so.
Yeah, I just thought of something that was really pertinent to me and my drive to help others in my life. I didn't know this until maybe 5 years ago, and it had such an impact on me, on myself and my own feelings of, oh my God, no wonder I'm like this. My grandfather, my father's father, and my great-grandfather, his father, were overseers of the poor. My great-grandfather came from Canada with his wife, Daisy, and Daisy was a native Canadian, an Indian, who was adopted by the doctor. That's what we know. Her mother died in childbirth, and the doctor adopted her. That's as much as we know. And Grandpa married her, and they came to Windsor. Now back then, Windsor was the big city of, was the capital, isn't it still the capital of Vermont? No. No, it's not the capital, but it's something.
The seat of something. Yeah, because the Historical Society is there, the museum.
Yeah. So, Grandpa came here, great-grandfather came and they farmed, and he was overseer of the poor. So, his job was very much like my job, was as a case manager and an advocate, was to see people who came to them usually, or they knew about, and go visit them and help them out, and if they needed to be on the poor farm so they could survive, he would help them get in.
And do you know, were poor farms run by the towns?
Yeah.
Not the state, but
well,
very
I think
local?
there was some oversight by the state, but they were town, because my grandfather, Percy Napoleon Courtemanche, better known to my grandmother as Pud, he was overseer of the poor for the town of Hartford. So he got it from his father, and he proceeded to be that way, and that's what my father was like. My father had a little company. My father was an entrepreneur. He was always trying to find something different. He didn't like working for somebody else. He really preferred working for himself. We always had cows. We had milk cows that we milked by hand at home. We had pigs and chickens and you name it, farm. And he would do for other people, like when he started his own oil company, Quartermatch Oil, and it was kerosene and heating oil, because he fixed those things anyways. He fixed the burners. He was a burner serviceman on those things. And he bought from Agway, Agway was a big oil company, and so he bought oil and kerosene. He had a buddy that was always at our house, and so he hired him, and one had the kerosene truck and the other had the oil truck, and Dad did all the repairs of the furnaces. And if there was someone in White River who couldn't afford to pay for their oil in the middle of the winter, elders most of the time, he would work out a deal with them if they didn't have any family, that he'd take the contents of their house when they died and bring it up to the East Stepford auction and make what he could off of that, which wasn't very much usually. But it was the best thing on earth because he brought a truckload of stuff home. And we weren't even allowed to crawl onto the truck, you know, a big ton truck. We weren't allowed. If you can see it from the ground, you can pick out one thing, and I always went for the jewelry. Whatever glistened, except for when I took that old man's teeth and put them in my mouth, and my siblings told on me because I was wearing old Mr. Albanese's teeth around.
You're how old at this point?
Maybe 8, 7, or 8.
Well, you know,
She's got that old man's teeth in her mouth! I know, I thought it was hilarious.
Giving also feels like it was part of the culture here. We've got volunteer fire departments.
Oh, my father was a firefighter.
You know?
Me, I was an EMT in West Virginia. I became an EMT living there. I thought about being a firefighter and decided that, nah, I didn't really. Same with EMT, you know, my heart just starts pounding and I'm not sure I'll survive when I see an accident. You know, I want to help and I sort of know how to help, but do I really want to help? I don't know.
Well,
I do, but
sounds like your
emotionally
forte.
I'm not sure I can handle it.
Well, and your forte is heart to heart in person.
Yeah, alive.
Yeah, alive. Yeah.
Alive is good.
Alive is good.
I can do till end, but I didn't know I could until I just recently did that. I didn't like, you know, I was glad that my job was over. When somebody was dying, it was like, okay, we'll get all services in place and monitor those things and make sure people have all they need, but I don't want to be there for that. I don't want to be part of that.
That's probably just as well. So, how has Marshfield changed since you moved here?
I don't know anyone on the select board. I used to know people in town. I don't know very many people in town. And I was already a little reclusive after I retired. No, I did go to work at the mall, but that was like a whole different world to me. Like, oh God, walking on cement all day, killing my feet, you know, instead of out in the garden. But I feel like there's not as much community for me. Without a child in the school system, it's a big thing. I don't know if people talk about that. I don't know if other people feel that way. But it was a huge, obvious hole in my life when that transition took place. Not only did I have to transition to my son going off to college and drinking and partying instead of studying, I didn't have the support I had.
Now, the old schoolhouse common wasn't here then, was it?
It wasn't being used. It was thrown up.
Because now a lot of the community things are happening
The
because
thing
of this.
for me is I wasn't grown up. I wasn't brought up to read. I was brought up to read, but I wasn't brought up to go to a library. We never went to a library when I was a kid. You lived on the farm, you had plenty to do, and you weren't be sitting down there reading. So that was how I was brought up. My mother, who was French Canadian and spoke broken English at times, didn't graduate from high school. She was a homemaker. She was a good, strict Catholic. She was, you know, we knew every prayer by the time we were 5 years old, and we said the rosary together in Lent and Advent. So 4 or 6 weeks in the fall and again in the spring, we were together as a family around the bed, kneeling down, praying for forgiveness because we were such little rats.
And
No,
what
really.
about the- what
You
about-
didn't fool around then. That's where I got my sense of humor. Because you didn't fool around. You were not messing with it. And if you did, you got the twist.
Well, you're making up for it now. And what about the music series? Do you do that? Or the community suppers or anything?
I did. I did. I used to bring one of my clients to the dinner who loved to come. And knew Lawrence. And so that was a real big deal. To go to the spaghetti dinner, we always called it. Let's go to the spaghetti dinner. And see Lawrence, because that was a big draw.
Lawrence ran the dinner.
And because I'm not doing that now, I'm not doing that respite care. I don't have those guys to come and. No, I didn't know very many people then. It just has dwindled to us older folks. There isn't. I think that the stuff that goes on at the what do you call that? It's not a greenhouse. it's the pavilion or whatever you call that out
the
there.
gazebo?
The gazebo.
Yeah.
I've been to a couple of those. I just kind of lost my connection to the community. And although I see people at town meeting and stuff, I see the old timers that always was friends with, and I see all the new people that I don't know. But the thing that was I've been having to deal with the developmental review board with a neighbor, and that's huge. That's a whole different approach to what he sees as community. Isn't this community? It's what he wants to create. And they don't wave. I'm a waver. You see your neighbor, you wave. When they don't wave back, it's like a slap in the face. It's, to me, with all that native stuff in me and all that goodness, it's really hard to not know what that's bringing and who are they and where are they coming from into my little dirt road. And so there's some of that that's going on in my life right now here that is really it's riddled with conflict for the people who have had their little rural homes, and this utopia wants to be built. And I find myself where I have been all my life. I like I said, I studied Buddhism and that kind of spirituality, and being a native Canadian, native Vermonter, whatever I am, my appreciation is of community that is built by everyone, and it's not exclusive of anyone, and that we all enjoy, but not taking away from other people so that you can create something that could be here, and it could include people here, but it isn't. So until that happens, I have to be against things, and I don't like having to be, politically and up in the, to the developmental review board and the zoning administration, and all those things are really stuff I never, I just followed the rules. Say I gotta have a permit to build a shed, okay, got a permit, built the shed, paid for it, whatever I gotta do, and so it's hard. And when you work so hard,
complication when we get to be more populated, larger community, it starts to break up into factions, and we need more laws and et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to watch.
And and it's hard to see what happens to our roads. Already I have neighbors that I say, I'm so glad you don't have a muffler on that car, so I can hear you when you're in the village, and that's 2 miles from the village. I can hear you coming, and I can know I'm not going out on that road. As long as you're coming up the hill, I can hear you. I know, okay, I'm safe. And then when he goes by up the hill, I say, all right, you made it. Coughing and gagging. There's a lot of disrepair of cars. But I don't like seeing people that aren't familiar with a windy road just cruising at 50. That's pretty frightening. And we don't really have a police force of any kind here. I mean, not that I would like to see there be a lot of police force, but I would like people to be just conscious of neighborhood, community. I've never felt so like I have to defend what that is. Yeah. For not just for me, but if I sell my place and down the road, I want that person to live in a community. Yeah. And if the community is next door, I guess that's cool, but they better come up with top dollar. That's all I gotta say.
So one last question then. So, how do you see this last kind of era in your life? Are you going to stay in Marshfield?
I don't know.
What do you hope for yourself?
It's really interesting that we're talking about all of this, and I'm looking for a community. I'm looking for more community. I'm looking for love. I'm looking for, I don't mean just a romantic love. That would be nice. But
I know what you mean.
For acceptance and love and wanting belonging and wanting to know your neighbor, wanting to know their hardships as well as their success,
And intimacy.
Yeah, it's really missing.
So what are you thinking about? You think about
I don't
looking
know.
at communities, or
I don't know.
You're sitting with the question in a Buddhist kind of way.
Sitting with the question. This is my goal. Clean up my clutter. So for the last 10 years, before I started in retirement and once I was retired, I wanted to go camping. I wanted to get out of there as much as possible. I want to go and have fun. And so camping has always been fun for me. It's not so much fun to be on the ground anymore, and I hate camping in the rain. Hate it. Rather go home. So I have a little camper, but I don't have anything to tow it with. I killed a car that was a 4-cylinder, just hauling it to Groton. So I'm stuck between kind of a rock and a hard place. I don't have the money to do all the things I would like to do. I'd like to see more of my son, who lives in Delaware, on the Delaware Bay in a $1 million home that his wife inherited well and they built. And I would like to see the West. I haven't seen much out there. I've heard that there's places that might even be helpful for arthritis in Arizona, and so I might want to go check that out. But I don't travel alone, and my friends are either working still at the Council on Aging, or they're retired and don't know what they're doing and don't have any money, don't want to spend anything because they don't know where the next one is coming. So it's I would like to see there, and I know other people that feel that way, people that I've been friends with here, and that feel like we're really missing something. We're missing something. The older folks had each other, and they knew of each other, and they knew to look out for each other, or who to look out for. And I think of Winnie Mundinger and all the stuff she's done for this town, and and I don't know. I just think there's more, and I don't know what's gonna become of things. Do I want to give up my little half acre of heaven that I've put everything I have into, or do I want to stay here and see what the next couple of years are going to bring with global warming and all these other things? And how safe is it to just sell your house and go live in an apartment?
Mhm.
That scares the shit out of me.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I'm between a big movement on my hill now, some folks that aren't going to be able to hang on to the land, some new people that have bought some land to save the other rest of it, and being surrounded by someone who wants to change it all and make it all his. So I don't know. I know that I'm concentrating on my clutter. And
Well,
I know that's all I know, is that I'm focusing because there may be something that happens that draws me up out of there.
Well, you know,
and if it does, I'm going to be flying something
you know,
else.
sounds like to me you'll know it when you see it.
Yeah. And when people start talking about what would you like? Well, I'd like to live in a finished house, and I'd like to not worry about the part of the floor that I never got to, and I don't have the money to now to fix that. I would like to know that I'm not going to fall in. And, you know, there's those kind of security things, but I feel very secure on a piece of land. It doesn't matter. I
Yeah,
mean, I'll live
right.
in my tent in the yard with the coyotes. You know,
And
Nate was terrified
is
as a
Nate-
kid of the coyotes because there we were, and they were yip, yip, yipping.
Oh, and to a
And that
kid,
was
it
back
could
in the
sound-
day when you only saw traffic on Ennis Hill on Mother's Day. All the locals took Mother around on the back roads. And that's what they did on Mother's Day. They go to the cemetery. No, they don't go to the cemetery on Mother's Day. That's Memorial Day.
Go get
But
plants. Go buy plants.
they go for a ride around on Mother's Day. Probably get plants, yeah. Probably go to the graveyard and put some plants on there. But anyways, that was the only traffic we had. I could count 7 cows a day went by my house. And now, with what's going on next door, it's like 20, 40 a day.
And when you say what's going on next door, somebody bought a big piece of land. Do you live near Trevor and Jill?
I live near Joe Lee. Joe Lee's farm. He land trusted
Oh.
the farm, and he sold it to Henry Harris, and Henry wants to have a big commune, and anarchists and activists and teach political advocacy and activism and anarchy and have a summer camp which really lasts all summer. And he bought Jerry Nash's house behind me, and so I'm surrounded on 3 sides by him. And the land trust has said he can't do things. He does them anyways. So the town is now having to look at things, and I've had to bring up ugly stuff, and I'm sorry I've had to. And I don't think I'm doing it just for myself. I think that but I am the most
You're trying
affected.
to hold on to or make
A neighborhood
a way that life can be. Yeah, a neighborhood. Yeah.
where you care about your neighbors
Yeah.
first, before you go anywhere else and all your highfalutin ideas,
Yeah.
is that you care about your neighbor.
Yeah.
You can care about what's going on in the world and global warming and every other thing. Black Lives Matter. Yes, they do. All that stuff matters. But it's really a tremendous shift to a rural neighborhood to have that be the focus.
And can Nate be a support to you?
You know, last summer he came and helped me with the kitchen. You know, and it's so wonderful. He's better at stuff than I am now. It's so
Great.
awesome.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
So he
He
helped
will
me.
come
He
here.
put in a new kitchen sink with me, and
Nice.
I gathered up and scrounged all the stuff I needed, and then he said, "I'm not putting that in there. We're going to Lowe's and we're buying you a real sink."
Wow.
And we'll just use the top that you got, but the rest of it, yeah.
Good to hear.
And so he tries to come for a couple days a year and give me a hand doing some project. And I hate that about, that's the only time I get to see him, is that when I've got a project that I can't handle alone, and like
Oh.
cutting the hole for the sink out of a countertop.
Maybe you should think up a few more.
Boys,
Huh?
children,
No, projects that you can't handle alone.
Oh.
He has to come up.
yeah, that would be nice, but that's not happening. He's very busy. He's making a really good income.
That's wonderful.
It's amazing. He could hire many, many more people, and he doesn't want to do any of that. He likes being himself.
He doesn't want to be a manager. He wants to.
No,
just
and he doesn't
be
want to go fast, and he doesn't want to go furious, and he doesn't need to be a millionaire.
Is there anything, any closing comment or anything you want to say, or have we touched the highlights? I know we've
We've
talked
touched the
for a couple of
highlights.
hours.
And you
Okay. So is he
Are you
somebody?
recording me?
I am not, I'll just kill it, right?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
kill it now. Is
And
he?
you were great.
Yeah.
Thank you.